So today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, honestly, a pretty complex topic: emotional weak spot mapping. Now, this isn't just about simple manipulation. Oh no. It's a whole psychological framework that explains how our best qualities, our greatest strengths, can actually be turned into our biggest vulnerabilities. We're going to explore how this whole dynamic works, all the way from what feels like a real connection to the power of pure awareness. The most striking truth about emotional weak spot mapping is that the person identifying your vulnerabilities isn't looking for your failings, they are looking for your virtues. We generally assume that people find our weak spots by seeing our mistakes, right? But when the pressure is on, your greatest strength, things like your loyalty or your powerful sense of justice, those are the exact data points used to anchor a control mechanism. And that leads to this huge question, doesn't it? Why is it that the person who seems to get you the most, the one you feel truly seen by, so often ends up being the one who can hurt you the most deeply? Well, that is the core paradox of weak spot mapping. It's that exact moment when your own integrity gets turned into the handle that's used to move you. And that's the paradox we're going to take apart piece by piece. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at how your virtues can become vulnerabilities. Then we'll dive into something called the intimacy illusion. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the mapping mechanism itself, and then unpack the psychology of control behind it. And finally, we'll talk about how you move from being audited to having sovereignty over your own mind and building what we'll call your secure perimeter. Okay, let's start with the big idea here. This whole process, it's not about someone hunting for your flaws. It's about them identifying the very things you take pride in, your character, your strengths, and seeing them not as virtues, but as levers. Yeah, this really flips the script on how we think about our strengths. A person doing this kind of mapping, they're not looking for your mistakes. They're looking for your internal rulebook. Are you fiercely loyal? Well, that's a fantastic anchor, a guarantee you'll stick around even when things get tough. Do you have this unshakable sense of justice? Well, that can be used to poke you and get a totally predictable angry reaction. Your need to be seen as hardworking, or that deep, deep fear of being called selfish, these aren't character flaws. Nope. They are high-quality, totally reliable data points that can be used to predict and then steer your behavior. In this system, your integrity becomes the most reliable tool for control. So, where does all this mapping actually happen? Well, it thrives in what feels like closeness, but is actually a one-sided psychological audit. This is what we call the intimacy illusion. And really getting this is the key to seeing the entire pattern. There's actually a technical term for this from behavioral science: affective reconnaissance. It's a really powerful idea. It describes that exact moment a social interaction stops being about two people connecting and starts being about one person gathering data. Think of it like this. It's the shift from a real conversation to an interrogation that just feels like a conversation. The goal isn't to know you. The goal is to get information about you. And this slide lays out the difference perfectly. In a healthy relationship, you've got mutual disclosure. It's peer-to-peer, you both share, the goal is connection, and it builds real trust. But with analytical reconnaissance, the whole dynamic flips. It becomes subject to analyst, it's one-way data mining, the goal is just information, and what it builds isn't trust, it's leverage. And that's the critical shift right there, from an equal relationship to one where one person is just a leaky faucet of data. So what does this actually feel like from the inside when you're the one being mapped? Well, usually 3 patterns pop up. First, there's the intimacy illusion itself, that sudden rush of trust you feel for someone who just seems to get your past, your struggles. Then there's something called predictive transparency, that creepy feeling of being totally seen through, that uncomfortable moment you realize, wow, this person knows my entire blueprint, but I know almost nothing about them. And finally, there's the self-revealing effect. This one's subtle, but man, is it powerful. It's that feeling, that urge to fill any awkward silence by just sharing more personal stuff, just to make the tension go away. You're basically volunteering the data they need to finish the map. Okay, so we've set the stage. Now let's look at the actual gears of this machine. This mapping process, it isn't random at all. It follows a very systematic, observable, 3-step pattern. These are the 3 phases: the shared wound probe, then the stress testing, and finally, the lever application. It's a sequence, right? It's designed to first get the information, then confirm it, and then ultimately use it. Let's dig into that first step. Step 1 is the probe. This is where the mapper might share what seems like a deeply personal story of their own vulnerability, a shared wound. This is specifically designed to trigger a really powerful human instinct called the reciprocity reflex. You hear a confession, and you feel this deep-seated need to offer one back. But here's the catch. Their vulnerability might be totally manufactured or at least strategically chosen, while yours is 100% genuine. The exchange is not equal at all. And the effect of this probe is, wow, it's incredibly potent. This right here is the source of the intimacy illusion. People who've gone through this often report this overwhelming feeling of being deeply understood, sometimes for the very first time. And that feeling, that's the anesthetic that allows the audit to keep going without you ever realizing what's happening. So once they've gathered that initial data, what's next? They have to test it. Stress testing is all about introducing these small, seemingly innocent comments or jabs about the sensitive stuff you've already shared. The goal here isn't to hurt you, not yet anyway. The goal is to watch your reaction. Do you get defensive? Do you shut down? Do you get anxious? Your reaction is the data. It confirms for the mapper that, yep, they found a reliable button to push, a really sensitive nerve. And finally, we get to the lever application. This is the end game. This step only comes out when a specific outcome is wanted. The mapper applies that targeted pressure on the weak spot they've so carefully identified and tested. For example, if they know you have a deep fear of being seen as selfish, they'll frame a request in a way that makes you feel incredibly selfish if you say no. That pressure triggers your predictable defense, and your defense leads you right into compliance. It's a perfect sequence. Their probe triggers your defense, which gets them what they want. So the big question is, why does this work so well? And what on earth motivates someone to operate like this? To get that, we have to look at the huge psychological mismatch between the person in control and the person being targeted. This whole thing works because of a fundamental asymmetry. For the controller, the motivation is often something called zero-force compliance. I mean, why argue with you or try to persuade you when they can just push a button they know is going to work? It's about managing you with the least amount of effort. For them, your weak spots gain what psychologists call incentive salience. They become these bright, flashing signs that promise a reward, your compliance. But on the other side, the target's vulnerability is often a deep, very human need for attunement, that desire to be seen, to be understood. The whole dynamic becomes exploitative the second that the value of being understood becomes more important than the need for being private. And this leads to a really critical psychological flip in the target's mind. You stop looking at the relationship based on your own well-being, asking, is this person good for me? And instead, you start judging yourself through their eyes. How do they see me? Am I living up to what they think of me? And that is the moment of capture. It's when your own perspective gets conditioned to value their judgment more than your own. Okay, after breaking down that whole mechanism, it's pretty natural to ask, so what can you do about it? And the answer isn't about fighting back or confrontation. It's about awareness. So now we're shifting from just analyzing this to empowering you, looking at the tools that can help you get back your psychological sovereignty. The single most important thing to remember is this: awareness by itself interrupts the cycle. The entire mapping process depends on the target having no idea that it's happening. The moment you can put a name to the dynamic, you start to take its power away. So the first tool is something we can call the reciprocity audit. It's a simple mental check-in you can do. Just ask yourself, is this conversation a two-way street? Are we both sharing, or am I the only one on the witness stand here? Is this a deep talk, or does it feel a little more like a data gathering mission? Just asking that question helps you tell the difference between a real connection and a psychological audit right in the moment. The second tool is information sovereignty. This is all about taking back control of your own story. It's the ability to sit in a conversation, notice the other person isn't really sharing much, and not feel that compulsive need to fill the silence with your own secrets. It's a huge internal shift, realizing that your urge to overshare might be a conditioned response, not a genuine wish to connect. Information sovereignty is accepting that you don't have to be totally understood by everyone to be safe. Okay, let's bring all of this together. We've gone from understanding how our best qualities can be used against us to the mechanics of mapping and the psychology driving it all. The final takeaway here is about building a secure internal perimeter. So, what are the big lessons to walk away with? First, your history is your currency. Be very mindful about who you give it to. Second, remember that being a good listener is a skill. It's a tool. It can be used for connection or it can be used for reconnaissance. It is not on its own a certificate of good character. Third, the cycle loses all its power the moment you realize that your own honesty is being used as the fuel for a mechanism of control. And finally, and this is the most important one, Your mind is a private territory. You have every right to decide who gets a map. And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. What emotional weak spot mapping really teaches us is that your sensitivity, your empathy, your integrity, these are not bugs. They are not flaws that need to be fixed. They are powerful features of your personality. And just like any valuable feature, they require a secure perimeter to protect them.